everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to do an herby fried chicken with some pumpkin Parmesan pasta and a spiced pear crisp. So first we're going to get our pears prepped and ready. I've got some 4 Asian pears here, which are a little bit different than regular pears. They're very light, sweet, have an extra crunch to them, but they're going to be wonderful in our little crisp here. They get very fragrant and are very flavorful, but they have a much different texture. You know how pears already have that little bit of a gritty texture? Asian pears have a lot of a crunch here. And because I'm not a big fan of the skins, we are going to peel off these skins for it, but they are a bit more tender. Now, they're not quite as tender as a traditional like Bartlett or a Bosc pear. They do have a little bit more of a texture, but you can keep them on if the skins don't bother you. And we're going to cook these up with some cinnamon, cloves, a little bit of ginger, so just some nice fall spices, a little bit of sugar. And we're going to actually add a little bit of apple cider in there to kind of stew our pears in. And then we'll make a delicious crumb topping for this. And then we'll throw in our pasta to cook up, fry up our chicken, and hopefully everything will be done at the end. And we'll have a delicious kind of yummy lunch on this nice fall day. I will say the weather was so wonderful today. We went to the pumpkin patch this morning and had a lot of fun. We did the corn maze, which we told our 13-year-old son, okay, look at the map, remember what it is. And like 2 seconds in, he forgot what the map looked like. And it took us much longer to find our way out of the corn maze, especially with the corn being really tall this year. So I said, future, let's take a picture of the map and not rely on our 13-year-old's memory. Okay, so we've got these. I'm going to start getting some of these chopped up to go into our pan to start stewing them for this. Nice, you don't have to do super thin ones. These are actually going to get tender a lot faster than apples, which make them a really, great addition to a crisp or even a pie. They taste very similar to apples, but I will just say just a little bit more of an aromatic flavor. Okay, we'll get these first kind of batch going up in here.
I don't think you can say that.
What?
Aromatic flavor.
Yes, it does. It has more like notes to it. You breathe it in, you feel it more. It's a thing. I'm going to say it. It's a thing. Whether I'm the first person coining it, it's a thing. People are going to agree with me. They agree with the chef, not the cameraman. Okay, we're going to put in about a tablespoon of butter. We don't need a whole lot. But this is just going to help when we add our cornstarch in. It's going to help make it a nice kind of really smooth gel here. So I'm going to get my back burner turned on. I've got it on about a medium high. And then I'm going to start turning up my water here to bring it to a boil. I need this to throw in my pasta. We've got this tri-colored macaroni pasta. It's actually like a maccheroni. It has 2 C's in it and an H. So not macaroni, but it looks like it. Here we go. Let's get these, and then we'll throw in a little bit of sugar. I don't like to make with a crisp, since we are going to be having this just delicious crumb topping on it. I don't sweeten up my fruit too much because I don't want sweet on top of sweet. I want the natural fruit to kind of shine through and those flavors without being overly sweet. Versus when I'm making like a double layer pie crust, like a lattice pie or something like that, I will sweeten up my fruit just a little bit more because I don't have as much of a, like topping in it. But we're going to get these in here. We'll throw this batch in, and then we're going to add our spices in here. So just some nice thin slices. Again, you don't have to go as thin with some of them as you would with apples, because apples take a lot longer to get nice and tender. But we're going to add in our spices. We're going to add in about a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then with our other two ones, we don't go too heavy on them because they're very strong spices. So we've got some ground ginger. And I'm going to do about 1/4 of a teaspoon of ground ginger, but I feel like pear and ginger just works really well. But ginger is a strong spice and it can be overpowering. It has a good kick to it. So don't go too bold on it. And same thing with cloves. I love cloves. That's that quintessential fall, wintertime spice, but it is strong. So we're just going to stick with 1/2 teaspoon of that because we don't want it too powerful. We're going to put in about 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And this is going to just mellow out the spices and notes, really blend it together. And then we're going to put in about 1 tablespoon or 2 of apple cider. If you don't have apple cider, you can use lemon juice. Lemon juice works well, but I find apple cider gives you just a little bit more flavor. You don't need a whole lot, like a tablespoon or so, tablespoon 2. It's just going to help it stew all together. Here we go. I'm going to give this our first batch, man overboard, a nice stir, and then we're going to throw in our sugar, and then I'll finish up with the last bit of pears in here, but I just want to get these nice and warm and stewing. For our sugar, we are going to use just a little bit of granulated sugar for this. Again, I don't go super sweet on the filling, so about 1/3 cup in here. We're going to just let the fruit do its natural sweetness on it, especially since we have a nice crumb topping. Okay, turn this up. Our water's got a nice boil. So we're going to put in our pasta here. And since I'm going to be using some of my starchy pasta water, I'm going to add in some salt. Open this up a little bit more. There we go. So a lot of times I don't salt my water because I find it just doesn't necessarily add so much flavor unless you're going to be using that starchy water, then I salt it. So we're going to put in just a couple pinches of salt in there for that because we're going to make a lovely pumpkin Parmesan cream sauce to this. Let me grab my pasta stirrer. Give it a nice little mix around. Always want to do that because sometimes you get that stuck on the bottom, a noodle or so, and you don't want to get those lost. Let's get these kind of coated up, push that butter down so it can melt and get that sugar mixed in. I've got it nice and high. And great thing about doing this with a Dutch oven is it's going to allow you to cook it up, keeps that heat nice and constant, but then we can just pop this all in the oven when we're done. We'll throw these last 3 pieces of a pear, but just use about 4 pears for this. I will say this is, for our family, this is like the perfect single meal size kind of crisp or dessert in here, which I always find is nice because I like to do a lot of baking. I love baking and cooking. And so I try to make smaller portions so that we're not just having to eat the same thing over and over. Now, we are a large family, so we do go through things a lot faster than most families here, since I'm typically feeding between around 9 people every single day. So we go through it pretty fast. So let's get these last little bits in here, and then we're going to work on our crumb base for it. And we're getting all of our crisp stuff done because once our pears have got a nice stewing on them, we'll put our crumb topping on and then we'll put it in the oven to bake, and that's when we can prep up the rest of our lunch. But I will say, it smells wonderful. Once this has come to a nice boil here, then we'll add our cornstarch in. Don't add it till towards the end. But let's start with our next part. We're going to do our crumb topping. So we're going to use 1/2 cup of melted butter. And I use salted butter in here because I think it just tastes better. But if you want to use unsalted, you can. And you could always add in a little bit more salt if you wanted to. We're going to add in, we got to do a little shuffle here. All of our pumpkins from the pumpkin patch are taking up my back counter there. I got to give them a good wash with some vinegar to help preserve them and keep them longer. But we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And you want to pack it in, or you can just kind of fill it a little bit over so you don't have to go in and grab it all. And we're going to add in about a teaspoon of cinnamon for this. So I like to use, I've got our spices in there, but I do like to spice up our kind of crisp topping as well. So we're actually going to use about a 1/2 teaspoon. I don't want quite a full teaspoon because we do have some stronger spices in our mix. And then we're going to do a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. This is going to give a little bit of a puff to our crisp, and it's going to give it a less of a crumbly type base, but a nice kind of thick, almost like a cake-like base with the crumb topping on top. So it's delicious. And we can actually use this spoon for this. We're going to give our butter, our cinnamon, our baking powder a nice little mix in here. And I always just like to make sure I get that brown sugar kind of dissolving into the butter first. Now we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of oats. I'm using old-fashioned, but you can also use quick oats. I would just avoid any like the steel cut oats. Those would give you a really crunchy and not a very great crisp to it. Make sure you coat your oats up with your cinnamon and butter mixture, because if you throw your flour in here, it makes it a lot harder to kind of coat it. There we go. And then I'm just going to add, before we add our flour in, just about a pinch or so of salt. You need just a little bit shy of a 1/2 teaspoon in there, but it's going to help bring out those flavors. And I'm going to give my noodles a little bit of a stir here. Make sure none of them are sticking. And then we're going to add in 3/4 cup of flour. And all-purpose flour is what you want to use. Okay. A little bit more. And we're just going to mix it in. Sometimes I add just a little bit more. I try to just look at the consistency of my crust or my crumb and see how it's falling together. I want it enough to make some nice kind of big crumbs, but not too much of a paste or too crumbly. So we're going to mix this together. And then I think I'm just going to add maybe a tablespoon more of flour. And then I'm more of, instead of stirring it, I'm more of just kind of like poking it to mix this in. This is looking pretty good. Okay. So we've got our nice little crumb base to go on top of our pear crisp over here. Our pears, I'm going to just pull all of this off. Here, actually, you know what? Lie, we're going to add about one more. Toss it with my hands. There we go. Okay, we've got our nice little base in here. Our pears, as you can see right here, we've got a nice, lovely, juicy bait to it. You can start to see they're getting a little bit translucent and a bit more soft. You don't need to cook them all the way until they're completely soft. This is perfect. I'm going to turn this down low, and then we're going to add in our cornstarch here. You're going to need about a tablespoon or so of it, but you don't want to just glob it in. You want to do a light little sprinkle over the top because you don't want to have it kind of congeal up. So a nice sprinkle.
You have a request? Can you go over what's all with the pears?
So yes, the pears, we have 4 Asian pears that we cut up and slice. Then we added a 1/3 cup of sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract, a tablespoon of butter, pinch of salt, and then about a 1/2 teaspoon of ginger and 1/2 teaspoon of cloves. There we go. Mix it in. And as it heats, as you can see, that liquid is getting a little bit thicker and thicker on there. You want it to form kind of a little bit of a gel, but it doesn't need to be super thick. Beautiful. Because it will continue to thicken up and go in there. Okay, perfect. And then I'm going to take my crumb right here and I'm going to just slide this to the side. And we're going to just kind of crumble it over the top of our pears here. And then you're going to make this just nice thick crumb layer on it. And we'll pop it in our oven and we'll bake it for about 25 minutes. But just make sure you kind of spread this as evenly over as possible. Tuck some of those pears down because you want it to all kind of come together to make one big crumb topping. Here we go.
You have a question. Where did you get that pan?
This is a Le Creuset risotto pot from there. I believe, I don't know if I got this actually from the Le Creuset store back by then, but I do have this on my Amazon storefront. I love this pot. It's great for risottos. It's great for rice. It's perfect size for cooking like a crisp. So since this is a Dutch oven, the nice thing about it is we are just going to pop this in the oven and we'll let it bake for 25 minutes. Now, if you do it in just like a basic pan, it takes sometimes a little bit longer, but since we started cooking that apple or those pears already, they're going to get tender faster. So I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes and it should be done. I know a lot of people will peel everything and then they pop it in the oven without doing that pre-cook. But then I find that you either have to cook it so long that you end up burning your crumb or your apples are undercooked. Okay, let's test out these noodles. I still think they need a little bit longer. So we'll let those kind of sit right here. But let me bring this over here because we're going to start on our chicken. So I have 3 chicken cutlets that I've already filleted in half here. And so we're going to make a nice flavored dredge for this and we'll whip up our eggs and we'll get ready to fry our chicken here. I'm going to do a nice kind of herby kind of seasoning to our chicken. I'm going to start with about 2 cups of flour with this. And then we're going to add in about a tablespoon or so of garlic salt, or you can use about, a teaspoon and a half of salt with a teaspoon and a half of garlic powder. But a couple good shakes over. You want to have enough because this is what's going to be sitting on the outside of your chicken, so it's got to flavor it all the way through. I have some smoked paprika. This is going to give it a nice kind of amber color when we fry it up. We're going to put in about a teaspoon and a half. And then we're going to use some dried rubbed sage, about a teaspoon. This is got a nice earthy flavor, which I think is going to pair really well with the Parmesan cream sauce that we're going to make, the pumpkin Parmesan, because pumpkin and sage work well together. We're going to put in about a tablespoon of dried oregano. And then a teaspoon of dried thyme. There we go. And then about a teaspoon of black pepper. And then we'll give this a quick mix. We'll whip up our eggs and we'll be ready to dredge these. And then after we do our first coating on our chicken, we will do our final coating with some panko breadcrumbs. But let me grab a fork here. Let's see. Before I mix this up, I want to check my noodles because we're getting kind of close to that time. And I'll just pull one out. You know what? They feel tender. So before we dump these out, we're going to reserve some of our starchy broth or water for our pasta sauce. So let me grab a thing and we're going to ladle out. Now this, you only need about a cup or so, but this starchy liquid will help make a nice velvety sauce without having to add a lot of cream. We're still going to use some cream in our sauce, but this will act as a natural thickener for it. So again, I'm just going to reserve about a cup or so of this starchy liquid. We'll put it over here for when we're ready to make our sauce. And we're going to strain up our noodles here. and then we can set them to the side. Now, I like to cook my noodles to about right at al dente or a smidge before, because we are going to be making a lovely sauce that these noodles will sit in, which means they'll soak up a little bit of extra things, which will make them a little bit more tender. We're just going to rest these right here. And I'll move this guy back over here because we'll use this for our sauce. But let's get our chicken going in here. So we're going to just kind of mix our herbs in here. Again, we use dried thyme, sage, oregano, garlic, salt, and smoked paprika and black pepper. And we're going to just mix all of these herbs into our dredge. And this is what we're going to coat our chicken on. And then our second layer, we'll add some panko. And then I've got some eggs that we're going to whisk together for our kind of our egg wash part. Here we go. Give my hands a quick rinse. Eggshell. And then we're just going to poke each yolk, and then we're going to whip these together. And you just want to make sure they're whisked up enough that you don't have any big stringy pieces of egg white. Otherwise, when you go to kind of batter up and dredge your chicken, you'll pull up a big stringy piece of egg white, and then you'll have like a soggy part of your chicken. That looks pretty good. Okay. Before we get going there, I'm going to get my oil, and we'll have it in here so that after I do my first kind of dredging, then I can turn it on to start warming up. I don't need a whole lot of oil, just enough to kind of make a nice thin layer on the bottom of my pan so that I can fry it on both sides. So let me prep this first before we go in there. You want to use one hand for dredging this, and the other hand can be your working around. But first, we're going to go through and we're going to just coat each piece of our chicken with our lovely seasoned dredge.
You have a question. Why do you prefer olive oil?
It's because I use it in everything and I like the flavor. And so instead of having a bunch of different bottles of oil, I can use that. And then I always make sure, especially when I'm frying, that I don't fry at a super high temperature. I like to fry at around 350, which olive oil is perfect. Its burning point is, much higher, around 450 or whatnot. So it allows me to use it for everything. And, it's good, kind of heart healthy and whatnot. And the flavor, I just like it. It's a very mild flavor. But I feel like, honestly, what oil you use is just like personal preference or whatnot. So, use what you like. I like, what is it? Some places use, fry in beef tallow or peanut oil and whatnot. So just got to pick the one you like. I'm going to turn my oil on high now. We're going to heat it up at high. And then when we actually go to fry, we're going to turn it down to a medium. So we're going to add in our panko breadcrumbs. We need about a cup or so in here. You could use regular breadcrumbs as well. They just don't give you quite as big of a crunch. And I'm just going to use my dredging hand, and we're just going to mix these up for this. Here we go. And now we're going to go, and you're going to take your chicken, and we're going to go into that egg mixture. And then we're going to go in with our second kind of coating of our dredge here. And then I just like to pat it down, help it get nice and firm. And this helps it kind of stick onto our chicken. And the same, we'll go in and coat it. That first dredging allows the egg to really bind with this the flour to kind of make what I would like to say a food glue, that will hold this second dredging on. And that's going to give you your nice crunch to your coating. And into it. And I always season up my first dredging. A lot of people will just do a simple, let me grab it. Look, I missed that whole little bit. So let me grab that real quick. But some people will just season up the second dredging. I season up both because that is where your flavor comes through. And you don't want to do all this hard work for a lovely chicken and then have it be bland or under seasoned. So always put way more spices in than you think, so that you get that good flavor all the way through. Here we go. And we're going to dredge up this, and then we're going to work on our sauce for our pasta. We're going to do a lovely pumpkin Parmesan cream sauce. We're going to saute up some garlic. And then we have some pumpkin puree in this. But we're going to do, I feel like pumpkin, a lot of times when it's done sweet, but I'm going to do it in a very savory way. You know, a lot of times people will add in like nutmeg or whatnot to have the sweeter tones to it. But I think pumpkin is lovely in its savory form. So we're going to coat this up, and then we'll work on that. And then our pear, our Asian pear crisp should be done in a little bit. And we'll be able to enjoy our lunch. Here we go. Coat this guy up. Looks like we're going to have a perfect amount of dredge. I always love it when it comes out to be just perfect. Now, you don't want to put your chicken in the oil until it's nice and hot. My best way of knowing when it's hot is when you drop in just a small little drop of water, and if it sizzles right away. If it doesn't sizzle, that means your oil's not hot enough. And if you try to fry in oil that's not hot, you're going to get a soggy chicken instead of a crispy one. So making sure it's nice and hot when you start is important, but also making sure your oil is not too hot that it just cooks the outside before you get the inside of your chicken cooked. So you've got to, I always like to cook it over a medium heat, but I heat it up on high. Okay, I'm going to get these guys out of the way. We'll wash my hands and we'll check our temperature of our oil here. Got to give a good scrub down. So there's no good way to really get your hands washed well after it. Okay, looks like we got this. And then let me grab my napkin. Okay, let's test our oil here. So I'm going to just put a little drop, and almost has a sizzle. So I'm going to say this needs about a minute more. Once it actually starts, that water will sizzle in just a second. Then I'll know it's nice and hot, and we'll drop our chicken in there. You grab, but always start on high and then bring the temperature out. Don't leave it on high, because if you leave it on high, it's going to burn it. And you don't think, oh, it's high. When I drop this chicken in, the chicken is cold, the oil is hot. It's going to bring the temperature of your oil down, which means it will be at a perfect medium when you're ready. Let's see. There we go. So that's the sizzle that I'm talking about. So I'm going to turn it down to about a 5 now, and we're going to put our chicken in. And don't overcrowd your chicken too much when you're, just about dropped it. When we're going here, put a little sprinkle of that. You know, 3 pieces at a time in this big pan works perfectly. You don't want them to be like on top of each other or touching each other that much, because the way they're touching, they're not going to get nice and crispy. Okay, we've got this frying up on our thing. Let's come over here and we will work on our pasta sauce here. I'm going to clear up a little bit of this real quick. We're going to saute up some onions, and then not our onions, we're going to saute up some garlic. Grab my butter and garlic here. Flip this over so we have not the sweet side of the pears touching it. But we're going to mince up a good portion of garlic here. I'm aiming for about a tablespoon, which is going to be around like 10 cloves or so. We're going to turn our pan on over a medium heat, around a 4, so medium low. And I'm going to start with like 3 tablespoons of butter for our pasta sauce. And we're going to let it melt. Don't have your butter or your pan on too high, because butter, if you heat it up too high, the milk solids in the butter are going to burn and scorch, and you don't want that. So we're going to melt that butter, then we'll toast up our garlic in here, and then we'll throw in our pumpkin and some spices, and then our reserved starchy water to make this sauce. Here we go. So you could also just use some garlic if you wanted to, or you could, get some really fresh garlic and de-wrap them and everything like that. I love these little cloves that you can get in a bag. They give you as close to a fresh garlic taste as I think you can get. Much fresher than just the garlic. And it's not too much work to mince them up. So we'll get these nice. There we go. Now, the smaller you mince the garlic, the more flavor that will come out on here. It's kind of, they say, the smaller to where you get to a paste, that's where you're going to get the most garlic flavor out versus bigger chunks are going to have less flavor. Here we go. So these are looking pretty good. So we've got about a tablespoon here or so of our garlic minced up.
Yeah, question, could you use garlic paste?
You could definitely use garlic paste. I would use a little bit less, probably a teaspoon and a half of it for it. Now, the nice thing about using the garlic cloves where you minced up right here, you're going to get a little bit of that crunch to it, that nice texture in our sauce.
Do you find that garlic in the freezer section or produce?
It's in the produce section, where you buy your fresh herbs in that little kind of section. That is where it is. And grab my pumpkin over here, and we're going to use a little bit of spices. Let me grab my garlic salt as well. And then we'll flip our chicken here in just a second. I'm going to mix in a little bit of chicken bouillon with my starchy water. That's going to add a nice kind of flavor to the pasta, a savory flavor to it, and a little bit of saltiness as well. Looks like I've got my butter on a nice kind of foaming here. I don't want it, if you want a brown butter taste, which has more richness, you're just going to let it cook for a little bit longer. But I'm looking for more not a brown butter flavor for it, although it does work excellent with pumpkin, but I want just kind of a foamy regular one. We're going to add in our garlic here, and I'm going to just coat it up. Watch your garlic. Make sure your temperature is fairly low. You don't want it too high, or you're going to burn your garlic. It burns pretty quickly, so just keep a good eye on it. I'm going to use about a good heaping spoonful in my starchy water here to flavor it up. Now, we do have salt in that starchy water as well, so you don't need to add so much salt to our pasta when we're getting there. But we're going to mix it up, and this is going to be used as a thickener in our lovely pasta sauce. Okay, give our garlic, I will say stir your garlic frequently. If it's left on that heat, it will burn. Let's get ready to turn our chicken here. Let's give it a good check. Ooh, a little bit longer. We're almost there. I want all of it to have this nice amber color to it. So it needs about, I want to say 30 seconds to a minute longer. I'm going to rotate my pan around, and we'll let this side get a little of that nice heat, and then we'll flip. Let's see. For our chicken, let me grab a baking sheet. I want my chicken to, I dropped a towel there, to rest on some paper towels when I'm done. It helps absorb that extra grease on there and keeps it nice and toasty and delicious. Okay, you can see our garlic is starting to get this lovely kind of golden brown little crispy edges on it, which means I'm going to add in some of my dried spices right now, which they'll kind of crisp up and add some flavor. We're going to add in, about a half a teaspoon of dried oregano. And these are all flavors that we have in our chicken as well. We're going to do about a half a teaspoon of dried thyme. and a half a teaspoon of sage. That's not sage. Here's my sage. I want there to be this nice herby note to it with the pumpkin, but I don't want it to be overpowering. But toasting up our spices in the butter is going to allow them to bring out their flavors a little bit more. And then they'll blend well into our pumpkin. But it smells wonderful. We'll let those toast there. Let's get our chicken flipped, and then I'll have to get beautiful. Got this nice kind of amber color to it. Beautiful. There we go. Just kind of toss that in there. Perfect. Looks like I got a little bit of that stringy egg white right there, so I'm going to pull that to the side. Excellent. And then I'm going to grab a second tongs for when these are ready to be removed, and I'll have them right over here. Okay. Let's get our pumpkin in here, and we're going to let our pumpkin cook up and toast. So again, this is just a great way to use pumpkin in a way that's not a pumpkin bread or a cookie or a dessert. I feel like pumpkin gets overused a lot that way. We're going to use about, I think we can get through a half a cup of pumpkin in here.
What temperature are you cooking that down?
My chicken, I'm cooking over a medium heat. My butter, right now I have over about a 3, so a medium-low heat. Not super high because I don't want my garlic to burn or my butter to burn either. So keeping it low will allow it to really seep in those flavors without them burning. Here we go. We're going to just toast up our pumpkin here right now with all of these lovely flavors. This is going to help make it very savory and delicious. Beautiful. Okay. You can kind of just smell that nice pumpkin flavor to it. Okay. Now,
what type of pasta are you using?
So this is a kind of a tri-colored, it's called a maccheroni. So it's not macaroni. It's like M-A-C-C-H. So maccheroni. But it's very similar to a macaroni or like a penne pasta. It's tubular. It's delicious. They had it at Costco. So exciting. It's like a new thing they had this time. You know how they always bring in some stuff. We're going to start by adding a little bit of our pasta water that we added our chicken bouillon to, a little bit at a time. In here, you don't want to just flood it. You want to kind of help marry it into our pumpkin puree, and until we've got this nice little base for this.
Have you ever made this recipe before?
I've made variations of this recipe before. I've done like pumpkin mac and cheese and pumpkin pastas before. But a lot of times I just go with the flow. I see how I'm like, oh, these will work. Spices go together. This works well together. You know, it's kind of like using a basic technique for the sauce, but new kind of flavor profiles. There we go. We're going to let that simmer for a second before we add our last little bit. We are also going to be adding some cream to this as well as some Parmesan cheese. So let's take a peek at our chicken here. We're looking good. Needs just a little bit more time. Beautiful. I'm going to get my paper towel ready to get ready to remove these off. Now, I like to do mine on paper towels. It kind of just like think about how bacon and it soaks out the extra grease. You could also do yours on like a cookie cooling rack. Those work well as well. Let's add in. And so this is, I think I have just a slightly bit more than a cup of starchy water with about a heaping teaspoon of chicken bouillon. Here we go. I'm going to turn up my heat now to about a 6. Let it come to a good boil. And then we'll add in our cream and our Parmesan cheese. And I think I'll add in a pinch of black pepper as well. Add in like a half a teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to mix this in here. And then I'll taste it before I add in my cream. knowing when you add your cream in, it's going to dull out your flavor some. So you want it to be a bit more flavorful than it would be. Delicious. You've got that garlic notes. You can taste that sage and the thyme. The oregano is just a great, very mild spice, but wonderful. Okay. We're going to add in our cream. We're going to add in about a half a cup, maybe a little bit less. So, and we'll mix it in, give it a good stir. There we go. Beautiful. You can just see how just a little bit really can bring down. I think I actually added closer to a third cup in here. Wonderful. And you want it to be a little bit runny because remember, we're going to be adding in our Parmesan cheese. So you don't want it to be too thick already or your sauce will be very, very thick. Let's let that simmer for a second. Let's check our chicken here. Beautiful. Now for our chicken, you want to put the grease side down so that it absorbs it as much as possible. Beautiful. And perfect. Let's put our last 3 in to cook. And then we'll go grab our pear crisp out of the oven and we'll be ready, almost ready to kind of serve up here in just a second because you guys won't make you guys sit through the whole second batch of chicken frying up.
Did you pound the chicken thinner and how long do you cook it?
So I didn't pound the chicken thinner, but I filleted my chicken breasts in half so that they are thinner. If you fillet them and you cut them against the grain, you don't have to do all of the pounding if you don't want to. On there, ooh, this looks beautiful, guys. So this is our Asian pear crisp. And you can see that we've got this lovely, that pear caramel sauce is kind of bubbling through with those spices. It smells amazing. It's got all that clove and ginger and cinnamon spices to it. So I'm going to put this right here. For the chicken, I kind of go by, I would say they were probably cooked about 4 to 5 minutes on each side. I go for the color. I cook them over a nice steady heat over medium. And once they've kind of get to that nice crisp, I know that they're ready. But just look at this beautiful, you can see that kind of sauce from that pear and that apple cider that we made kind of bubble up through. But we used Asian pears in there, which will give them this lovely kind of crisp flavor to it. Okay, I'm going to turn. I've got my pumpkin sauce here kind of bubbling up. I'm going to turn it down to low. We're going to add a little bit of our Parmesan cheese in now. Then we're going to add our noodles in, and then we'll top it off with a little bit of green onions and whatnot. And we'll be ready to kind of serve up our dinner. So freshly grated Parmesan cheese is great, but if you don't have that, you know, I love the shaved Parmesan cheese from Costco. Works great. We're going to start by probably adding in around maybe a half a cup, maybe a little less. And we're going to let this melt in here. And then we'll throw in our pasta. And then I always throw in a little bit after that. But make sure your pan isn't too hot on here. You want it to melt nicely, not like kind of crisp up at the bottom of the pan. There we go.
Have all your recipes posted?
I upload the videos for all of my live streams on my page so everybody can always watch and recreate them at home. I do send out a couple recipe cards each week with some of the recipes that I made for it. Now, don't worry if your pasta is stuck all together like this. With about 20 seconds of tossing, these will break apart. I don't ever like to coat my noodles in oil because I find then the sauce doesn't adhere as well to them. But just toss your big noodles here in it, and as they hit that sauce, they will break apart and coat up. Now, again, remember to cook your pasta to about an al dente or just a smidge before, because it's going to help soak up this lovely sauce that we made. Whoops, I'm kind of made a big mess here. There There we go. But just see how it's just coating up beautifully on our pasta here. Wonderful. And then we'll throw in a little bit more Parmesan cheese on there just to kind of do our finishing touch. And then, of course, some fresh green onions. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple kind of shavings of the Parmesan. We're just going to flake it over the top here, and we're going to let that steam kind of start to melt it, and then I will mix it in. That way it doesn't bring down the temperature of my pasta too much. Beautiful. Let me grab a paper towel here. And then we're going to wipe up our area here, and we'll get ready to serve. I've got my green onions here. I think we're not going to use all of them. We'll just use 2. And I'm going to add these into our pasta to add this nice little fresh bright note at the end. I love green onions or chives, scallions. Those all add this really great fresh onion flavor, which I think complements the nice savoriness of the pumpkin. You could also throw in, some fresh thyme as well, or if you had a chance to saute up some sage. I don't like to throw fresh sage in on dishes at the end because sage has a little bit of a fuzzy texture. Okay. We've got these minced up. We'll toss these in, but let me toss this cheese in first that we've got melting here. Beautiful. I'm going to turn this guy all the way. I'm going to actually turn him off because he is beautiful. Look at that. It is. Look, you can see all that Parmesan cheese in that bowl. Let's toss in our green onions here. Give this a good stir. Wonderful. And then I'm going to flip our chicken, and then we will serve up our lunch here. Let me grab this for the flip, and then we'll... Beautiful. I think these 2 need a little bit more on that side. But let's serve up our lunch here. And we grab... Slide this down here. Okay. And let me grab my shovel because the shovel is the best. Okay. For lunch today, we have a delicious pumpkin Parmesan sauce over our kind of tri-veggie noodles with, we kind of seasoned it with sage, oregano, thyme, with our Parmesan cheese in it. And then we will serve this up with our fried chicken that we also use sage, oregano, and thyme and garlic salt as those nice, lovely flavors together, which will add just a wonderful little bit of pop of, just coziness to it. And then for dessert, we will have our Asian pear crisp that we seasoned with cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and then we made a lovely crumb topping using butter, brown sugar, oats, and a little bit of cinnamon for that. Just delicious. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on the page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. We've got our pumpkin Parmesan pasta with fried chicken and our pear crisp, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my cutting boards, my hex clad pans, my Le Creuset risotto pot, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.